On a cold March morning in 2024, New York authorities were called to a luxurious apartment on the Upper East Side. What they found there would forever change the lives of a family in India and shock Manhattan's international student community. Priya Sharma, a 19-year-old student at Columbia University, had been found dead in circumstances that initially appeared to be a tragic accident. But as investigators delved deeper into her digital life, a dark web of secrets, manipulation, and exploitation began to emerge. Priya's last social media post, published just 48 hours before her death, showed her smiling in an expensive midtown restaurant, wearing a designer dress that cost more than her monthly scholarship. The caption read, "Living the dream, juice blessed life to NYC." What her friends and family didn't know was that behind that perfect image lay a much darker reality. A young dreamer, Priya, had arrived in the United States in August 2023, full of hope and determination. The daughter of a public school teacher and a nurse in Mumbai, she had won a partial scholarship to study computer science at the prestigious Columbia University. She was the first person in her family to study abroad, carrying not only her own dreams, but the expectations of an entire community that had invested in her education. She was bright, determined, and incredibly hardworking, recalls Rajesh Sharma, her father, in an emotional video call interview from Mumbai. Priya always said she would go to America and do something big. We never imagined that this is how she would make headlines. Priya's first few months in New York were exactly as she had imagined. Her grades were excellent. She had joined the university's programming club, and she had formed solid friendships with other international students. Her video calls home were full of enthusiasm as she described campus life, inspiring professors, and the endless opportunities New York had to offer. But there was a growing problem that Priya tried to hide from her family: money. Financial pressure. Despite her scholarship, the cost of living in Manhattan was astronomical for a young woman from a middle-class family in India. The rent for her small room in a shared apartment in Harlem consumed more than half of her allowance. Books, food, transportation, clothes suitable for the harsh New York winter, everything cost much more than she had anticipated. She started mentioning that things were more expensive than she expected, says Meera Patel, her roommate and fellow international student from Nepal. But Priya was proud. She didn't want to worry her family or seem like she couldn't handle independence. To compensate, Priya started working part-time at a coffee shop near campus, which was allowed under her student visa. But even with the extra work, she could barely cover her basic expenses. As she watched classmates from wealthier families enjoy expensive dinners, designer shopping, and weekend trips, Priya felt increasingly isolated and pressured. It was in this state of financial and emotional vulnerability that she met Marcus Wellington. The encounter that changed everything. The first contact happened in a seemingly innocent way in October 2023. Priya was studying in the university library when her old, slow laptop finally stopped working during a crucial programming session for an important project. Frustrated and on the verge of tears, she couldn't afford repairs, let alone a new computer. She was approached by a well-dressed man who had observed her situation. "Sorry to bother you, but I noticed you're having trouble with your laptop," he said, introducing himself as Marcus Wellington, a 45-year-old tech entrepreneur. Elegant in his tailored suit and exuding confidence, Marcus offered immediate help. "I know a great repair shop nearby. How about I take a look?" What could have been just a kind gesture from a well-meaning stranger turned out to be the first carefully calculated move by an experienced predator. Not only did Marcus arrange for Priya's laptop to be repaired the same day, something that would normally take a week, but he also refused to accept any payment. "Consider it a small contribution to education," he said with a warm smile. "I love supporting bright young people in their academic journeys." The first seeds of manipulation. In the days following their chance encounter at the library, Marcus began to appear more and more in Priya's life. First, it was a message on Instagram congratulating her on an academic presentation she had mentioned. Then, an invitation to coffee, as mentors do with promising students, at a fancy cafe on the Upper West Side. During that first official coffee, Marcus introduced himself as a successful investor in tech startups, someone who had started from scratch and now devoted part of his time to identifying and nurturing young talent. He demonstrated impressive knowledge of Priya's field of study and asked insightful questions about her projects and career ambitions. "He seemed genuinely interested in my future," Priya had told her friend Sarah Chen a few weeks later. "Not like those guys who only want one thing." Marcus talked about internship opportunities, industry connections, how I could stand out in such a competitive field. Marcus was meticulous in his approach. He never made obvious romantic advances initially. Instead, he positioned himself as a mentor, a protector, someone who understood the unique challenges international students faced. He talked about his own immigrant journey, even though he was a third-generation American, and how he had learned to navigate New York's elite circles. The subtle escalation. During November, Priya and Marcus's meetings became more frequent, always in public and respectable places, fancy restaurants, art galleries, tech networking events. Marcus gradually introduced Priya to a world she had never imagined accessing. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, exclusive events at elite co-working spaces, informal meetings with other young entrepreneurs. For a young woman who had grown up middle class in Mumbai and now struggled to pay for student pizzas, this world was as exciting as it was intimidating. Marcus always insisted on paying for everything, but in an elegant way, never making Priya feel like charity. "He had a way of making it all seem natural," recalls Meera, her roommate. Priya would come home with new clothes, talking about important people she had met, incredible opportunities that were coming her way, and it was always, "Marcus introduced me to," or "Marcus suggested that." Marcus's psychological manipulation was subtle but systematic. He alternated between boosting Priya's self-esteem, praising her intelligence, ambition, and unique potential, and creating emotional dependence. He began to suggest that other students and teachers did not truly understand her value, that she was different and special in ways that only someone with his experience could recognize. By December 2023, 3 months after meeting Marcus Wellington, Priya Sharma's life had changed dramatically. What began as occasional mentoring meetings had evolved into something much more complex and dangerous, although she still could not identify exactly what was happening. It was like watching someone being enveloped by a fog. Mentoring had evolved into something much more complex and dangerous, although she still couldn't quite identify what was happening. "It was like watching someone being enveloped by a fog," describes Sarah Chen, one of the few close friends Priya kept during this period. At first, she was just excited to have met someone important. But then, gradually, she started to distance herself from all of us. The first significant change was financial. Marcus had started offering increasingly extravagant gifts, always wrapped in seemingly innocent justifications. A new iPhone because a tech student needs the best tools. An expensive winter coat because I can't let such a talented young woman freeze in New York. Money for books as an investment in her bright future. Each gift came with a rational explanation and a paternal smile from Marcus. He had an impressive ability to make Priya feel special for deserving his generosity, while simultaneously creating an emotional debt that she unconsciously felt. The introduction of the apartment. The turning point came in January 2024, when Marcus made an offer that would completely change the dynamics of their relationship. During dinner at a fancy Italian restaurant in Soho, He casually mentioned that he had an extra apartment on the Upper East Side that was just gathering dust. "Indisu, Priya, I've been watching how you've been struggling with the living conditions in Harlem," he said, his voice laden with genuine concern. "That apartment is available. It has 24-hour security. It's close to campus. Why don't you consider moving there? It would be much more convenient for your studies." When Priya protested that she couldn't afford the rent for an apartment on the Upper East Side, Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. Consider it part of the mentoring program. Young talent needs the right environment to flourish." The apartment was everything Priya had dreamed of. Spacious, modern, with a view of Central Park. Compared to the cramped little room she shared in Harlem, it was like a palace. Marcus arranged for the move at the end of January, insisting on paying for furniture and even a new wardrobe, suitable for professional networking. The isolation begins with the move to the new apartment. Marcus subtly introduced rules and expectations that began to isolate Priya from her previous support systems. He suggested she spend less time wasting energy on people who don't understand her ambitions, and more time focusing on real opportunities for growth. "He never directly told her to stop seeing us," recalls Meera Patel, her former roommate. "But suddenly, Priya was always busy with some important event Marcus had organized. She always had a new excuse for not showing up to our usual get-togethers." Marcus also began introducing the idea of professional discretion. He explained that, given his status in the business community, it was important that his mentoring program not be misinterpreted by people who didn't understand complex professional relationships. Priya should keep their meetings and her new living situation private, especially from her family in India. "You don't want your parents to worry unnecessarily," he argued. "They may not understand how professional connections work here in the United States. It's better to spare them the confusion." The first intimate request. In February 2024, Marcus finally revealed the true nature of what he was building. During an evening at his apartment, a Tribeca penthouse that cost more in monthly rent than Priya's family earned in a year, he made his first direct request. "Priya, you are a beautiful and intelligent young woman," he said, as they poured expensive wine after dinner. "And I am a man who appreciates beauty and intelligence. We have a special connection, don't we? Why don't we explore that more deeply?" When Priya hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the change in direction, Marcus immediately changed tactics. He didn't press her physically, but emotionally. He talked about how he had invested in her, about the incredible opportunities that were yet to come, about how special people like them had relationships that were different from the conventional. "I'm not talking about anything sordid," he reassured her, sensing her resistance. "I'm talking about a mature, mutually beneficial relationship. You continue to focus on your studies. I continue to provide support and guidance, just with a more personal dimension." The escalation of control. After that conversation, the dynamic between Marcus and Priya changed irreversibly. Although she did not immediately agree to his more intimate requests, Marcus had planted the seed of a new reality. He began to be more explicit about his expectations in exchange for his support. He established regular times for them to meet. Initially, these were innocent dinners, but they gradually evolved into expectations that she would spend entire nights at his apartment. Marcus developed an elaborate system of emotional rewards and punishments based on her availability and appreciation. She started mentioning that Marcus got upset when she wasn't available, says Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a counselor at the Columbia Mental Health Center that Priya had briefly sought out in March. She described feelings of guilt when she disappoints someone who has done so much for her. These are classic signs of psychological manipulation. Marcus also introduced an element of surveillance disguised as care. He installed security apps on Priya's phone, supposedly for her protection as a young woman living alone in Manhattan. He wanted to know where she was, who she was talking to, how she spent her time when they weren't together. The financial aspect intensifies. As February turned into March, Marcus became more direct about the transactional aspect of their relationship. He began giving Priya regular allowances, initially $2,000 per week, then increasing to $3,500 in exchange for her company and discretion. "It's just recognition for your time," he explained. "Successful people value quality relationships, and you deserve to be valued." The money was tempting for a student who had struggled financially, but it came with invisible strings attached. Marcus laid down rules about how the money should be spent, insisting that she buy certain clothes, frequent certain beauty salons, and maintain certain standards of appearance that he approved of. He also began to use the money as a form of emotional control. If Priya questioned any of his demands or tried to maintain boundaries, Marcus would become disappointed and reduce or completely suspend his financial support, reminding her of all the opportunities she would be missing out on. The ignored warning signs. During this period, several people close to Priya tried to express concerns, but she had become skilled at deflecting questions. When her family asked about her new expensive clothes and improved lifestyle during video calls, she credited additional scholarships and freelance work opportunities. "We knew something was wrong," said Professor James Mitchell, her academic advisor, who noticed changes in Priya's behavior and priorities. Her grades were still good, but she seemed distracted, stressed. "When I asked if she needed any support, she always said everything was fine, that she was just exploring networking opportunities." What no one knew was that Marcus had become increasingly possessive and controlling. He monitored Priya's activities, discouraged relationships he didn't approve of, and gradually created a world where she depended completely on him for validation, financial security, and social guidance. By March 2024, Priya Sharma had become completely entangled in the web, carefully constructed by Marcus Wellington. What she didn't know was that other young women had gone through the same process before her, and that Marcus had much more sinister plans for the future of their relationship. On March 15, 2024, just 1 week before her death, Priya Sharma made a discovery that would completely change her perception of Marcus Wellington and put her in mortal danger. It all started with a seemingly insignificant mistake. Marcus had forgotten his laptop at her apartment after one of his regular nighttime visits. Initially, Priya had no intention of violating his privacy. She just wanted to return the device when Marcus returned. But when a pop-up notification appeared on the screen, showing a message from a young Asian woman with a profile picture that said, "I need to talk about the money you owe me," her curiosity was piqued. What Priya discovered upon further investigation made her blood run cold. Marcus's laptop contained a meticulously organized folder titled Special Projects, which revealed the true extent of his predatory activities. The multiple victim system. The files revealed that Priya was not even remotely the first young international student Marcus had mentored. In fact, she found evidence of at least 7 other young women over the past 3 years, all international students between the ages of 18 and 22, all from middle-class families in developing countries, all initially approached under the guise of professional mentoring. There were photos, text conversations, detailed financial records, and even intimate videos that Marcus had collected without the young women's knowledge. Each relationship followed a pattern almost identical to what Priya had experienced. The casual encounter, the trust-building phase, the gradual isolation, the free apartment, and finally, the transition to sexual expectations in exchange for financial support. It was like reading about my own life, but multiplied by 7, Priya later told Sarah Chen during a desperate phone call. Every conversation, every gift, every promise. He had used exactly the same tactics with all of us. Mildis, the fate of the others. Even more disturbing were the discoveries about what had happened to her predecessors. 2 young women had disappeared after trying to confront Marcus about the relationship. One had supposedly returned home due to family emergencies. Another had transferred to a university on the West Coast. But Marcus's records suggested something far more sinister. In text conversations with an unidentified associate, Marcus casually discussed methods for solving problems when his girls became problematic or uncooperative. There were veiled references to permanent solutions and necessary cleanups. One particularly shocking folder contained documents about Anastasia Volkov, a 20-year-old Russian student who had been found dead in her apartment 6 months earlier, in September 2023. Officially, her death had been classified as an accidental overdose, but Marcus's files contained photos of her unconscious and references to experimental dosages of unidentified substances. The blackmail attempt. Priya also discovered that Marcus had installed hidden cameras in her apartment, cameras she never knew existed. He had recorded all her intimate moments, phone conversations with her family, and even her private reactions of distress as she struggled with her situation. These videos were not just for his personal pleasure. Marcus used them as blackmail material. There was evidence that he threatened to send intimate videos to families, universities, and future employers if any of his victims tried to expose him or escape his influence. He had created a perfect system, Detective Michael Torres, who investigated the case, later explained. He specifically chose vulnerable young people from conservative cultures, where sexual shame would be devastating. It was an almost inescapable psychological prison. The fatal decision to confront him. After discovering Marcus's true nature, Priya spent 2 days in shock, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. She considered several options: going to the police, contacting the other victims, fleeing home. But Marcus had been careful in his legal manipulations, and Priya knew it would be her word against that of a well-connected and respected man. On March 17th, she made the decision that would cost her her life, to confront Marcus directly and demand that he stop his predatory activities. "She called me the night before," recalls Sarah Chen. "She was determined but scared. She said she had discovered terrible things about Marcus and was going to confront him. I tried to dissuade her, but she said she couldn't live knowing that other girls would go through the same thing she had." The confrontation. On the afternoon of March 18th, 2024, Priya met Marcus at his penthouse in Tribeca. She had carefully prepared her approach, documenting all the evidence she had found and sending copies to Sarah as a precaution. According to the building's security cameras, Priya arrived at Marcus's apartment at 3:30 p.m., appearing calm but determined. What happened over the next 3 hours was only later reconstructed through forensic evidence and audio recordings that Priya had secretly made on her phone. Marcus initially tried to deny the accusations, then downplay them as misunderstandings. When Priya threatened to go to the police and expose the entire scheme, including her evidence about Anastasia and the other victims, Marcus's behavior changed completely. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he said, his voice becoming cold and threatening. "I have connections you can't even imagine. I can make your life, and your family's life, very difficult." The fatal escalation. When Priya stood firm in her decision to expose Marcus, he realized he had lost the psychological control he had always maintained over his victims. By 6 p.m., the situation had escalated to physical violence. Later, forensic evidence showed signs of a struggle in Marcus's apartment. Furniture was overturned, glass was broken, and, most significantly, there was evidence that chemicals had been forcibly administered. Marcus had prepared a syringe containing a lethal mixture of synthetic drugs, similar to that found in Anastasia Volkov's system months earlier. When Priya tried to leave the apartment, he forced her to inject the substance, hoping that her death would look like another accidental overdose by a stressed international student. The final moments. The last recordings on Priya's phone, discovered days later by investigators, capture the terrifying final moments of her life. Her voice, growing weaker due to the drugs, still tried to bargain for her life. "Please, Marcus, my family. They don't know where I am," she whispered as he carried her unconscious to a car. Marcus had planned to dispose of Priya's body in his own apartment, creating a narrative that she had committed suicide due to academic pressure and financial problems. He had done this before, and it had worked perfectly, but this time something went wrong. Maybe it was the excessive dose of drugs, maybe it was Priya's unexpected physical resistance, or maybe it was simply karma finally catching up with Marcus Wellington. When he arrived at Priya's apartment at 9:45 p.m. that night, she was already dead. And for the first time in his career as a systematic predator, Marcus had left enough evidence for the truth to eventually come out. On the morning of March 19, 2024, at 7:43 a.m., an anonymous call came into 911 reporting a possible overdose in an apartment on the Upper East Side. What appeared to be yet another tragic case of a young person under academic pressure would soon reveal itself to be something much more sinister. Detective Michael Torres, a 15-year veteran of the NYPD specializing in crimes against vulnerable youth, was assigned to the case. At first, everything pointed to suicide or accidental overdose, he recalls. Young international student, financial pressures, substances in her system. "We saw similar cases every month." But something bothered Torres from the moment he arrived on the scene. Priya Sharma's apartment was too luxurious for a student with financial difficulties. The clothes in her closet cost thousands of dollars, and there were subtle signs that someone had tried to tidy up the scene before the police arrived. The first inconsistencies. The initial autopsy revealed a lethal mixture of synthetic fentanyl and ketamine in Priya's system, drugs she had never used before, according to everyone who knew her. Even stranger, the injection marks on her arm suggested forced administration, not self-administration. The position of the body was also wrong, explains Dr. Sarah Kim, the medical examiner responsible for the case. If someone voluntarily injects themselves with a fatal overdose, the body falls in a specific way. Priya was clearly positioned after death. The scene investigation also revealed evidence of cleaning. Industrial cleaning chemicals had been used recently, and several surfaces showed signs of having been scrubbed hard. Whoever found Priya first had tried to erase evidence. The discovery of the phone. The first major clue came when investigators found Priya's phone hidden under her mattress, a strange place considering she always kept it close by. More importantly, the device contained audio recordings she had secretly made in the days leading up to her death. The recordings revealed conversations with Marcus Wellington, including explicit threats and evidence of blackmail. But when investigators tried to locate Marcus at the address Priya had provided, they discovered that no Marcus Wellington lived there. "That's when we realized we were dealing with something much bigger," says Torres. The identity Priya knew was completely fabricated. The predator's true identity. Through analysis of security cameras and verification of financial records, police discovered that Marcus Wellington was actually David Chen Morrison, a 47-year-old man with a complex criminal past and multiple false identities. David had grown up in a dysfunctional family in Queens, suffering childhood sexual abuse by an uncle who was later discovered to be a serial predator himself. This had created a disturbing pattern where David had become both a victim and perpetrator of a cycle of abuse. He had studied psychology at university before dropping out, explains Dr. Robert Kellner, a forensic psychologist, consulted on the case. David understood deeply how to manipulate psychological vulnerabilities. He wasn't just an impulsive predator, he was a calculating professional. Vile, the crime network, uncovered. As the investigation deepened, detectives discovered that David operated an international sexual exploitation and human trafficking network disguised as a mentoring agency for international students. He had partners in at least 7 countries, including South Korea, India, Brazil, Nigeria, and Ukraine. The operation worked like this. Recruiters identified bright young people from middle-class families in developing countries who were applying to American universities. They provided free consulting to help with applications, even offering financial support for application fees. Once the young women arrived in the United States, David or his associates would make contact, always under false identities as successful businessmen interested in supporting young talent. The rest followed the pattern Priya had experienced: trust, dependence, isolation, exploitation. The other victims revealed. The investigation revealed that at least 23 young women had fallen prey to David's scheme in the past 5 years. 3 of them had mysteriously